I quietly left after discovering my wife's affair. After 3.5 years of marriage, a year later, my ghosted ex-wife tracked me down after hearing of my wife's adultery. I moved to the hills. I'm not sure why I'm writing this, but perhaps it will be helpful to someone. Now that the incident is over and I've moved on, I can look back and reflect. After 3.5 years of marriage, I learned of my wife's affair in February 2018. I worked a contract job that occasionally required a lot of travel, but also allowed me to work from home. When I returned, I was a director at a technical sales company, and my wife held a very lucrative position. Although things had become a little strained due to her working longer hours and me traveling for work, we still had what I would call a fairly excellent marriage. Background: 5 years ago, at a cookout hosted by a mutual acquaintance, I met my wife, who is now my ex. We immediately clicked after we started talking. To be honest, I felt that being with a woman who was so attractive and articulate was a huge advantage. My rough around the edges demeanor somehow appealed to her. After a few weeks of dating, we found ourselves smitten with one another. When we met at each other's apartments, the clothes simply flew off. After 18 months of dating, we eventually got married and moved into a large apartment while saving for a down payment on a home. Things began to change after the first 3 years of marriage. Even though I still had feelings for her, I noticed that she would argue over little matters. When I mentioned all the late hours and increasingly regular work outings, since she had been moving up the corporate ladder, she claimed that it was a necessary component of paying her dues at least. That was her justification. She informed me that since I was also away for weeks at a time, I had no right to challenge her. In reality, I had only been taking vacations for 3 or 4 days every 5 weeks or so, so I assured her that I could definitely manage cutting back on my travel time. There was never a conclusion to these highly circular arguments. Looking back, I realize I was unaware that my wife was having an affair. Aside from our declining sexual life and her persistently late work hours, I would never have suspected anything. I simply assumed that she was exhausted from her job, but being rejected so often when I tried to initiate intimacy had taken a toll on my ego. Although she had a work mobile phone and might have been using it, I didn't witness the covert texting that I had read about in other articles. She used our spare bedroom as a home office and spent a lot of time there. Around September 2017, Kathy began returning home from work and spending the evening at a work engagement instead. This increased from 1 night per week to over 3 nights each week. Although I'm not naturally envious, I was aware that she would be observed by others, and I knew she would need to repel some of the males at her workplace. Despite working with more male SOs than female ones, the first time I suspected she was cheating was a month prior to D-Day. Before returning home, she had made a brief stop at the supermarket and asked me to assist her with the grocery shopping. Something pink was glinting from just beneath the front passenger seat of her automobile as I was retrieving a few items from the rear seat. It was a bra that belonged to my wife. She preferred ones from a certain clothing store, so I knew it was hers. Looking back, I can see that the bra was a warning sign. She always removes her bra first from under her clothes when she's feeling very lustful. I'm not sure why, but when I saw this, I felt sick to my stomach right away. I couldn't understand why her bra was beneath the seat. I didn't say anything more. My heart must have been pounding so hard that I nearly passed out, because when I brought the bags back to the kitchen, Kathy asked me how I was feeling and said that I appeared to have seen a ghost. I simply ignored her remark. It took everything I had to conceal my emotions, but I did my best not to appear upset or deceived. I made the decision to try to find out whether or not she was seeing someone that night. The following day, I began to consider all the hints I could have overlooked. Other than the bra, I had no evidence. She works in an office building downtown, and we live in a reasonably big city. I made the decision to temporarily put the affair idea out of my mind and consider giving her more of my attention. I prepared a delicious meal and arranged the dining table with elegant plates, silverware, and candles. One Friday after work, I purchased an arrangement of flowers and a lovely bottle of wine. I pointed out the dinner and everything I had made when she arrived, breezing in after work. She apologized and said she was sorry, but she had to go to a neighborhood hangout to meet up with her coworkers. She mentioned that she needed to take a shower first, but could have a small snack with me before she left. I guess I went utterly silent because my insides flipped on me. I won't explain the type of anger I was experiencing at the time, but I had had enough. I took my work cell phone and threw it in her back seat while she was taking a shower. I had been considering this as a means of using my own phone to find her. I walked into the kitchen after that and threw the food and flowers in the garbage. After taking a shower, she got ready and looked stunning as always. "All right, let's eat," she said. "Never mind. Go out with your friends," I replied. She asked me if I was angry after giving me a weird look. "I'm sad that you never want to do anything with me," I said. She got upset and sarcastically remarked on my short fuse while telling me to stop acting like a kid. I muttered "foolish me" as I stood there allowing everything to settle in. For once I felt we should spend the evening together. She simply gave me a sly smile and stormed off. I pulled out my second phone and began following my work phone when she departed. About 20 minutes away at the bar she often visits with her coworkers, I saw her stop. I made the decision to go find her automobile. Indeed, it was in the parking lot of the bar. I waited to see if I could see her in my car across the street. I felt completely different, like a stalker, but I told myself that I had to calm my fear of her whereabouts. I observed her leaving the bar with a man about an hour after I got there. He had the appearance of an executive from her company. He took hold of her, drew her near, and planted a kiss on her lips. My body was totally numb and my stomach started to clench up. They went to a different vehicle and climbed in together. When their car pulled out, I tried to keep up with them. You guessed it, they drove to a hotel 10 minutes away. As I stopped on the street beside the hotel, I saw them exit holding hands and enter. I'd seen enough. I felt foolish. I began pounding the steering wheel with my fist. That was it. Something went totally blank inside of me. I'm not sure if I had an out-of-body experience or blacked out, but as I came to, it felt like I wanted a drink. At this point, my life started on a path I never would have imagined. I simply began to drive out of town, replaying all that I had just seen. I was crying out of anger as much as I hate to admit it. I located a pleasant little tavern on the outskirts of town some 30 miles away and stopped in. I ordered a drink while seated at the bar. The bartender, a lady, said that I looked like someone had taken the wind out of my sails, so I guess I looked like death warmed over. I answered, half smiling, "You could say that." A man sat down beside me and struck up a conversation. Even though I didn't feel like talking, there was something about this guy that put me at ease. We struck up a conversation and eventually my wife's infidelity came up. I told him that all I wanted to do was get away from her and forget about her. "You're not alone, buddy," he replied, giving me a back pat. "I experienced that a few years ago. I think there's a reason why these things occur. Your life can now take a positive or negative turn. I assure you at this point everything is totally up to you." His remarks, for some reason, jolted me out of my gloom. Even though I was aware of my pain, I've always been able to see things rationally, and he was absolutely correct. His name was Ray. I really liked his salt of the earth vibe, even though he was more of a country guy. "Are you going to move out?" he inquired. "I suppose I never thought to look that far ahead," I replied. I had a fight or flight response going on, and I knew I didn't want to be around this woman any longer. "I have an idea, and I feel very sympathetic to your situation," Ray added. When the time comes, I have a mobile trailer on my land in case you feel the need to go. It might require some work and isn't very big. But why don't you visit and see if you could imagine yourself briefly residing in something like that? I'll give you a terrific bargain on it. At least you could even park it on a lovely piece of property I own. I would appreciate it if you could. I took a moment to comprehend his concept. Hell, honey, if I could have escaped my crazy ex-husband years ago, I would have jumped at the chance to go live in his trailer or anything just to get my head on straight, added the bartender who had been listening in on the chat. Perhaps this was just what I needed, but I felt as though I had wandered into the twilight zone. Yes, I'll think about it and maybe check it out, I said to Ray. After a while we split up and agreed to get together at his house in a few days. I began to feel as though I had some perspective and an opportunity to escape what I thought was a terrible heartache. Combined with a night away, I knew one thing for sure: I would never ever want to spend time with my wife again. I find cheating to be so disgusting, and it has always been the one thing I thought I would never put up with. I sat there on that bench, staring at Kathy as she spoke, all the while feeling like a stranger in my own body. The woman sitting in front of me, charming me with her false smiles, her subtle attempts to reawaken a connection that had long since died, wasn't the same woman I had married. I had changed. I had learned. As she raved about my appearance, her eyes flicking over my body like she was trying to reassess who I was, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of disgust. She didn't care about me then. She hadn't even cared enough to be honest when it mattered. So why now? Why was she reaching out after everything had fallen apart? After the lies, the betrayal, the months of agony I had endured, when she chose to tear apart the life we had built. I took a breath, the air of the hills filling my lungs, grounding me in the present. Her apology didn't sound like a genuine one. It was too rehearsed, too convenient. As if she'd had time to prepare this speech, to realize that she had lost something she didn't truly appreciate until it was too late. She spoke of karma, of how life had thrown its punches at her since I left. "You know, Paul," she said, her voice now quieter, tinged with guilt, "I never meant for any of this to happen. I never thought I could lose you. I never thought you would really leave." I just shook my head slowly. It was surreal to have her sitting there trying to play the role of a remorseful wife, as though that would somehow erase everything she had done. But the truth was there. The truth was all I needed to see, to understand. There was no magic conversation that could undo the damage, no heart-to-heart that would make everything go back to the way it was. The connection I had felt with her before gone. "You never meant for any of this to happen?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "How is that possible, Kathy? We spent years together, years, and you chose to betray me, to lie to me, to make me feel like I wasn't even worth a fraction of your honesty." She looked down, the weight of my words sinking in. "I don't know what happened," she murmured, the cracks in her fade starting to show. I got lost. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could do everything and still have it all." I couldn't help the bitter chuckle that escaped my lips. "You really thought you could have it all, didn't you? You thought you could cheat, lie, and then just keep everything else in your life perfect. But life doesn't work like that, Kathy. You can't take from people and expect nothing in return. That's not how it works." Her eyes flickered with a mix of guilt and something else, regret maybe. I wasn't sure. But what I did know was that I wasn't buying into her words anymore. "I'm sorry, but you can't undo what's been done. The person you wanted me to be, the husband you promised to cherish, he's gone. I'm not that guy anymore, and you, Kathy, you're not the person I thought you were maybe once. We were right for each other." She shook her head as if she couldn't quite grasp the truth of what I was saying. "Paul, please," she implored. "You don't have to be so cold. I made a mistake. I've learned. I've changed. I want to make things right." I stood up, the weight of her words not affecting me in the slightest. If anything, they only made me more resolute in my decision to move on. "You can't fix this. You can't go back and change anything. What you did to me, what you did to us, it's irreversible." I watched her struggle to hold back tears, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered everything. All the times I had cried myself to sleep. The truth was I had been more than enough. And that was the hardest part of it all. I had given everything to someone who didn't even value me. "Goodbye, Kathy," I said, my voice final. She reached for my arm as I turned to walk away, her touch lingering for just a second longer than necessary. "I never stopped loving you, Paul," she whispered. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to hear it, because that love had died the moment she chose to betray me. I walked away from her, from our past, from everything that had once seemed so promising. It was over. I had left it all behind, not just for her sake, but for mine. As I headed back to my cabin, the cool mountain air refreshing against my skin, I realized that I was finally free. Free from the chains she had tried to wrap around me, free from the past that had haunted me for so long. I didn't need her closure or her apology to heal. I had found my own way, far from the life I had known. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most powerful thing I could have ever done for myself. Because in that moment, I wasn't just walking away from her. I was walking toward my own future, one that was mine and mine alone. When I got home to my little cabin, I threw my things down with a sigh of relief. The peace of the mountains, the simplicity of my new life, had become my sanctuary. No more lies, no more pain, just clarity. I thought about the new woman I had met, the girl I was beginning to get to know. But I wasn't in a rush to dive into anything. I wasn't looking for love, I was looking for myself. And in a way I had already found it. As I poured myself a drink that evening, I sat on the porch, looking out over the quiet valley below. The stars were brighter here, the air cleaner. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. Kathy's presence, her attempts to find me again, were part of a life I no longer needed. My new life was waiting for me right here in these hills, and it was everything I had been searching for. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day I felt more solid in my decision. My cabin, isolated and quiet, became a sanctuary, not just from Kathy, but from the chaos of everything I had left behind. I took long walks through the trees, watching the world around me shift with the seasons, the crisp air carrying away the remnants of old wounds. The mountains had a way of putting everything into perspective. Here, surrounded by nature's beauty, I felt a deep connection to something larger than myself. I didn't need answers or validation anymore. The silence and stillness had given me something more precious than any conversation could have: peace. My days fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were spent with coffee and a book on the porch, watching the light dance on the leaves as the world around me slowly woke up. I'd go for a hike, sometimes getting lost on the winding paths, breathing deeply and taking in the beauty of the world that had been so easily overlooked in the rush of life. Evenings were quieter, dinner for one, a glass of wine, and the stars above that seemed to hold all the answers I no longer needed. But even in the peace of this solitude, I found myself thinking about Kathy sometimes. The weight of our past wasn't something that could be erased overnight. While I'd moved on, I couldn't forget everything she had been. And for a moment, I wondered if I was strong enough to let go of it entirely. One morning, a knock at the door startled me. I hadn't been expecting anyone. Who could I expect, living so far away from everything? I opened the door, half expecting it to be a delivery or someone from the town down the road, but instead I found a man standing there holding an envelope. "Paul Richards?" he asked, his voice low, almost apologetic. I nodded, a bit surprised. "That's me." He handed me the envelope, his fingers brushing against mine, sending a small fleeting jolt through my chest. "This is for you. It's from Kathy." I hesitated, staring at the envelope. Kathy. I hadn't expected to hear from her again, not after our last conversation. I had thought that would be the end of it, that I had left that part of my life behind completely. But here it was, a letter in her handwriting. The small flicker of curiosity tugged at me despite myself. "Thank you," I muttered, still caught off guard by the sudden intrusion. The man didn't say anything else, only nodded and left, disappearing down the path as quickly as he had arrived. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the envelope in my hand, before I finally took a breath and went inside, closing the door behind me. I sat at the small kitchen table and examined the letter. The paper was heavier than what I would have expected from a regular envelope, smooth, almost elegant. There were no frills, just her name written carefully in the corner. It felt oddly intimate, as if she were still reaching out, trying to pull me back into the life we had once shared. With a steady hand, I tore open the seal, unfolding the paper inside. The handwriting, familiar but distant, seemed to be dripping with something I couldn't quite place. Was it regret? Was it genuine remorse? Or was it just another attempt to manipulate the situation in her favor? I read the first few lines slowly. "Paul, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to read this letter. I just wanted you to know something. For all the mistakes I made, for all the things I did wrong, I never stopped loving you. I've spent months thinking about everything I lost, and I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I need you to know that I've changed. I'm not the same." I paused, letting the words sink in. There it was again, this attempt at closure, this final plea that seemed to echo everything I had heard before. I could feel my jaw tightening, a familiar bitterness rising in my chest. The anger I thought had long been buried suddenly crept back in, and I had to fight the urge to crumple the paper in my hand. But then I forced myself to keep reading. "I know I can never make it right, but I wanted you to hear it from me. I hurt you, Paul, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to atone for it, but I can't ask for your forgiveness, not after everything I did. I don't even know what I'm asking for. I just needed you to know the truth." There was more details, explanations, apologies, that felt a bit like a broken record. She explained how her life had spiraled after I left, how she had regretted her decisions, and how she had started therapy trying to make sense of her actions. But it all felt hollow. The words seemed to fall flat in my mind, each sentence a reminder of how much time had passed since we'd last spoken, how far apart we had drifted. When I finished reading, I sat back, my mind racing, my emotions a tangled mess. Part of me wanted to burn the letter to rid myself of everything she had ever been, but another part, a smaller part, a weaker part, still felt something. I had spent so much time trying to rebuild myself after everything fell apart, and here was Kathy asking for closure, for redemption, for something I wasn't sure I was capable of giving. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, setting it aside. I wasn't ready to make any decisions about it. I didn't even know if I would ever send her a reply or if I would ever have anything left to say. But for now I was okay. I had come so far. I had learned how to live again without the weight of our past on my shoulders. And that in itself was enough. The mountains still stood tall outside, unchanged by the storms that had passed through my life. And so would I, no matter what came next. I was stronger now. I knew what I had lost, but more importantly, I knew what I had gained. Peace. And that was something I would never trade for anything.